For the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the letter to the Hebrews. Last Sunday, Susan preached on this passage in chapter 11. It's a recounting of the heroes of the faith in the Bible. And just for those who came in after the announcements, there is a typo in the bulletin. The title of the sermon is Living the Hyphen to the Fullest. Hyphen is not a new theological term that we're throwing out. Listen now for the Word of God in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 29 through the end of that chapter, and then the first two verses of chapter 12. They're really quite famous. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be more perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know if you've ever noticed or not, but it's kind of dangerous to start looking at your family tree. You never know what you might find. Wonder how many of you have done Ancestry.com. Go ahead, show of hands, or 23andMe, or whatever those DNA things are, and you find out you're related to someone way back in whatever country, and you find out all kinds of things you're not so sure about. A few years ago, I did Ancestry.com, and we could find all the way back to practically 1100 in Scotland through Jane's side of the family, and we found all kinds of things. I mean, these people had clay feet. I mean, we're not perfect. None of us is perfect, but wow, some of the things our relatives pulled. And some of them weren't very boring, which is kind of nice. I mean, you got your Uncle Bernie and your Aunt Matilda who did things in their 20s and 30s. You would never, well, maybe you did a couple of them, but that's a scary thing to look back. That's what the letter to the Hebrews does here in this chapter 11. It looks back at the heroes of the faith in the Bible. Frederick Buechner, in his book Peculiar Treasures, talks about climbing up into the musty biblical attic, where the great cloud of witnesses gathers with the idea that he's going to sort of knock some of the dust off of this motley group of scoundrels and saints and all different kinds of people, only to find a great surprise. They knocked the dust off of him. He started out thinking he knew who they were and what they said and what they did, only to discover that they had minds of their own and lives of their own, like our children pretty much do. When they're growing up, we think we know our children, but they have minds of their own and lives of their own, or characters in a novel where a novelist tries to manipulate certain characters into a specific literary box, only to find out, and you will find that out if you ever try to write a novel, that your characters will say, wait a minute, that's not the way I would say that. Or they will say, wait a minute, this is what I would do in this situation. Buechner was surprised everywhere he turned as he marched through the stories of the biblical characters. He kept trying to figure them out. And what surprised him most, what struck him most, was both their extraordinary aliveness and their power to help him feel more powerful and more alive than he'd ever known before and ever been before, just by knowing them, beginning to know them, beginning to learn about them. Even across the centuries, that power still brings tears to our eyes and shivers up our spines. These saints and these scoundrels, these nabobs and these nobodies, they galvanize the pages of the Bible, and yet they seem still very alive if you look at them closely. And why? Because they lived their lives to the fullest. It didn't matter how long or how short their lives, they lived their lives to the fullest. Which brings us to the correct title for the sermon this morning, Living the Hyphen to the Fullest, which I'm sure has caused some of you to wonder, what in the world is he going to do with that? What does that mean? Well, it's very simple if you stop and think about it. David Buttrick once put it this way: our brief lives are like the hyphen on the gravestone between the date of birth and the date of death. And what we do with our lives is we live that hyphen. And it doesn't really matter how long or short, it's about how well we live, how fully we live, how completely we live that hyphen. Ask yourself the question this morning, how completely am I? How fully am I living the hyphen in my life? So often we're just rushing around from here to there, and we never really stop and think about the meaning of our lives or the real purpose of our lives. The story, we smile at the story of the airline pilot who calls the control tower and he says, yeah, I'm lost, but I'm making great time. That's the way we are sometimes, aren't we? We're a little bit lost. We're not sure who we are, what we're doing, what our identity is, why we're here, but we're making great time with the hectic pace and our iPhones and our iPads and all the different things we do just to keep up with it all. The biblical characters, I want to suggest this morning, knew how to live the hyphen to the fullest. Even the first and second strings of those biblical characters, they all knew how to do it. And the reason is they knew the difference between what we call chronos time, C-H-R-O-N-O-S, and kairos time, which is a biblical word, kappa, alpha, iota, rho, omicron, sigma. In English, it would be K-A-I-R-O-S. And that is full time. That is time where you are experiencing soteria, shalom, peace, oneness, not only with God, but with your fellow man and woman and with all creation. That is what kairos time is about. And the Bible talks a lot about the biblical characters who lived kairos time all the time. Some of us live only in chronos time. We're just marking time, and we're just surviving. My grandma Corey, my mother's mother, with whom I lived for 3 years when I was in college because her husband had died back in 1959. She never remarried. But she let me live with her in college for 3 of my 4 years. We had so much fun. She was such a character. And she lived with both Chronos and Kairos time. She wanted everything on time. If it was dinner time, I better be there, and I better not miss. There are lots of people who are into Chronos time. I see you when you look at your watches sometimes during sermons. I watch you glance. I can see what you're doing out there. What bothers me is when some of you take your watch off and shake it to see if it stopped, Well, Grandma Corey was really into Chronos time. And the way I know it is she went to a huge Methodist church in downtown Tulsa. And they had the sermon at the end, not kind of in the middle like we do. And invariably, the preacher would go past noon. I said, Grandma, what'd you think? Oh, I didn't like it at all. Well, what did you do? I imagined him standing on a trap door, and I had the cord in my hand. What'd you do? At noon, I pulled the cord. Stopped listening. That was my Grandma Corey. She was into Chronos time, but she was also into Kairos time, because when my Grandpa Corey died, I loved him so much. He bought me my first baseball mitt. I was just a little kid. It hurt so bad, and it hurt her. It hurt our whole family, but she learned how to live on with her life and to bring great joy to everyone. She had this sense of peace because she was close to God, and she taught me about Kairos time. The biblical characters not only taught Frederick Buechner about Kairos time, but they teach all of us, if we spend any time in the Bible at all, getting to know them. They understood. And it didn't matter what happened to them. 40 years wandering in the wilderness, a lion's den, a storm, a flood. Why could they live the Hyphen to the fullest? Because they were close to God. This wasn't some Pelagian or semi-Pelagian pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's not a sermon, because that means you can do it without God. They knew they couldn't do it without God. They needed God. No matter what's going on in your life or in our church or in our city or in our state, if we are not focusing on what is God doing in the middle of all this, then we're missing the point. If we're only on a lateral level and not being also vertical, then we don't understand what the religious life is all about. The biblical characters understood because they were close to God, and they felt God's presence, whatever was happening to them or those around them. How important it is to feel God's presence when you are discouraged or hurting or upset about whatever it is. Irma Bombeck talks about Terry Anderson, the American journalist who was held hostage in Hezbollah prison in Lebanon for years. She talks about the fact that you cannot get a refund or a credit on the days of your lives. Once a day is over, it's gone. That's it. And she says what struck her the most about Terry Anderson's experience in the prison was his determination to live every single day to the fullest, 1 hour at a time. She said every day isn't the day you win the Pulitzer or make love or win the lottery or lose 3 pounds. Some days are just normal. Some days are just plain, and you just get through them. Some days are painful, and you just get through them. She said Terry Anderson had a bad run of days, a run of really bad days, 2,445 of them in prison, and he made the most of them. He played the cards that he had been dealt, and he did it with faith with anger, with humor, and with the help of a lot of friends he knew were praying for him. That's what the biblical characters did. That's what Jesus did. Jesus only lived 33 short years, but he made the most of them. And he said in John 10, I have come to bring life that they may live it abundantly. Jesus understood. What does that mean? It means being in right relationship with God. It means right relationship with neighbor, with your colleagues and friends. It means in right relationship with all of creation. That's what it means to live the hyphen to the fullest. You can't do it by yourself. You can only do it with God, with the presence of Christ in your life. That's the only way. There were people throughout history who have understood this, people who are never beaten down by others. They're not deterred by those who try to discourage them, whether it's Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr., who are ready to accomplish the dream God has given them, to do something great, to make a difference in their lives. They are not put off by the opinions of the world, whether it be Schweitzer or Gandhi. They knew that there was a need, and they were called to fulfill it. And they did it with every fiber of their being. That's what all these biblical characters, these heroes of the faith in chapter 11, Hebrews 11, did. Whether it be Rahab the harlot, or Samson, or David, or Samuel, or Gideon, didn't matter which one, you can pick any name. They were not deterred by the world pushing them around. I always get great quotes after the first service because people come through and they say little things here and there. One woman standing toward the back said, "Now I know what to do with people who are irritating me." I said, "Oh, okay, what?" She said, "I'm going to say, quit stifling my hyphen." Okay, I guess that'll work. People who know how to live the hyphen to the fullest are people who can show us how to do it, even in the face of death. Like a man I heard about who was only 47 up in Seattle, was told he was terminal, had a year to live. And he thought about all the things he had dreamed of doing in his life, but he only had one more year, and he'd always wanted to build a nice home on Orcas Island. And so he did. And then he beat the disease, and he got to enjoy that home until he died at age 86. What is the one thing you would do if you were told you only have one more year to live? Well, why don't you just go ahead and do it? Why are you waiting till you're told you only have one more year? There are people who understand how to show us what to do in living the hyphen, even in the face of death or in the face of the death of a loved one. I remember doing a committal service at a graveside, and as I finished, the wife of the man I was about to bury raised her hand and said, "Dr. Carl, could I say something?" And I said, "Sure." And she started in with the biggest smile I have ever seen. "I want everyone to know this is a joyous day, a joyous time for me and my family, because I look at this casket and I want to tell you, Elmore and I had so much fun. It just makes me chuckle thinking about him there in that casket, and we just had a great life, and I just wanted to say that." Now here's a woman who understands how to live the hyphen to the fullest, even in the face of death. Jesus knew how to do that. On the cross, he had all these words. A couple of them were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And then, "Into thy hands I commit my spirit." There are some people who know how to live the hyphen to the fullest, to the very end of their lives. My friend Dell was like that. He called Jane and me a couple of months ago, hadn't talked to him for a while, a graduate of Pittsburgh Seminary from years ago. He was even recognized as a distinguished alumnus. He had an amazing career, not so much in pastoral ministry, but he was a protege of Carl Menninger. He had coached CEOs. He had taken over companies. He helped more people than you could ever imagine. He had an amazing mind. And he called to say goodbye. Dale, what are you talking about? He said, I've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and it's growing. It's going so rapidly that my doctor told me I probably wouldn't make it to Christmas. And I decided I want to call some of the people I love and tell them thank you for everything and say goodbye. And we had a great conversation. I didn't want to hang up because he said this is probably the last time we'll be able to talk because I am quickly going into this deep darkness. But I just wanted to tell you and Jane how much my wife and I love you. And I hope you have a great life. And then he hung up. Going to miss him a lot. Some people know how to live the hyphen to the fullest. Living the hyphen to the fullest. You can't do it without God. To this God be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all. And don't let anybody stifle your hyphen, okay?